Welcome to the Getting High on Leadership series featuring Paul Karasik. Paul is one of America's top management consultants helping leaders succeed. He is the author of 9 books, including Sweet Persuasion and Brilliant Thoughts and Provocative Questions. His insights appear regularly in major publications, and he is one of the most sought-after executive coaches. Paul founded the American Seminar Leaders Association and the Psychedelic Institute of Los Angeles. He is a popular speaker at national conferences and has been on stages across all 50 states and internationally. Paul's work addresses the question, how can we transform conflict in business into collaboration? With decades of experience in management, leadership, and psychedelics, he brings a unique perspective on personal and societal growth. In this series, we'll be discussing his latest book, Getting High on Leadership, The Leader's Guide to Higher Consciousness. We'll be exploring the concepts, techniques, and mindset required to revolutionize leadership. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the series. I'm your host, Rob Sanchez, and we are joined by Paul Karasik, author of Getting High on Leadership. As we make our way through his book, section by section, we're spending a little bit of time on each one to talk about conscious leadership. And today's is a very important one, and it's called World-Class Presentations, as leadership at many different levels often can start or maybe sometimes get hung up on a world-class presentation or one that was supposed to be world-class. And Paul, as a speaker, across many different stages, I know you're very familiar with crafting and presenting, but how can a conscious leader approach their presentations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's some years ago I took a class with one of the great screenwriters here in LA, and it's of course a 3-day workshop on how to write a screenplay, and the name of it was called Story. And I didn't do it because I was sort of thinking about writing a screenplay, but I was so embedded in the concept of story, and I wanted to see how movies worked in terms of story. And I'll tell you something, I'm kind of sad I took the class because it took a lot of the fun out of movies since then.
Now you're just analyzing the story as it unfolds.
Well, I see, it's a pattern, and some break the pattern, but the vast majority of Hollywood movies never break the pattern. The inciting incident happens within the first 5 minutes. Act 2 begins halfway.
That structure is very much defined.
Yeah, depending on which type of theme or of the story, it's always the same. If it's a movie about the great these Marvel comic type things, there's always the confrontation between the ultimate bad and the ultimate good, and they're gonna get together and bang it out in that last act of the movie, and it's coming.
That story structure is so familiar, right? Even in the third act, right, the hero has an all is lost moment. They've confronted the villain again, and now maybe they won't actually succeed.
Right, there's a doubt, or they get really image. They get a knife in their thing, and how is he going to survive this? And then the angel comes and brings him back to life after he dies, and then he wins. So story. And one of the things I took away from that workshop was that how embedded the human psyche is embedded in story, and how it's such a vital part of communication. And it's in everything. When Jesus wanted to teach people, he said, I'll teach with story. And he wrote parables about the second son and the first son and the grapes and this and that. And they were all stories, to convey the highest truths that he could. You look at Zen.
Yes.
Really complex stuff he was talking about.
Yeah, in the there's a book out called Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari, and he talks about the evolution of information in society. And he talks about it from the very beginning, and the first version of information that he expands upon is the story, and how important that was to unite people and to spread wider than your communication network, and deeper than your communication skills can really instill. And just the way that a a well-honed and crafted story can capture the mind or inspire your followers, or really build our image of leadership, is based probably on how good those stories are.
A lot of it, you look at the great speakers, they all use stories. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, a lot of presidents that are good communicators when they're running for office. Or just Ronald Reagan was a master at storytelling and jokes, and I think it was part of his popularity because he came from the movies, so he was really embedded in stories. We look at the Aesop fables. Here are these great moral truths and so on. Again, just stories about tortoises and hares and this and that. So story, it connects us to the archetypal patterns that already exist in our brain that are universal. It's like the universal contact. It's full of imagery, and the mind thinks in imagery. And that's why, in America, we treat the people who tell our stories like royalty. Like in England, you have kings and queens and princes and princesses, and here we have actors and actresses. Those are our royalty, and we rolled out red carpets for them, and we take 800 pictures a second, and when they come out of a car, and like the Queen.
The story is the core of perhaps information and a greater picture here, but also of presenting, right? You don't want to get on a stage without a story to tell.
No.
You're not there to just present your data.
No.
Our findings this quarter are XYZ, and this is what we're expecting
that's the least thing. Yeah, that's the least important thing. It's the stories, and to start to take an interest in this. That's really important. To actually understand what we're saying in this chapter and say, well, I'm not great at stories, or I'm good at these kind of stories, and really take an interest in it. And so I always suggest, and I suggest it because I do it, is you write down your stories. And start giving them names. So I have like the orchid story and, the Mary story, and I know when I want to put them in. And these stories have been crafted over years and years of delivery. They could still be, they're not written word for word, but they can be crafted and adjusted based on the group to further fit it in. And then when I get up to do a presentation, I don't write any notes. I just write which story. So if I'm going to do an hour presentation or 20, I might have 3 stories or 4 stories. And then all the points are, rather than write the points and, oh, by the way, there's a story with this. No, the story becomes the king. And, oh, by the way, here's the point. Slow and steady wins the race. And, that's...
So giving yourself the stories as like kind of the tent poles, and then filling in the space leading in between those stories.
You don't even have to think about the rest. The rest just fills in, and then you just write the name of the story. You don't have to write the story out. So if I say the Mary story or the orchid story, I know exactly what it is. I know how to introduce it, and I know it fits in perfectly into that presentation. And
nobody wants 20 slides of a presentation, anyways, right? It's as well thought out as your slides are. It's just not. It's not capturing your audience as much as you want it to.
Yeah. Well, I say slides don't sell, they tell.
One of my favorite speakers that presented for Agile, kind of talking about different ways to build teams and communicate with leaders, gave a whole presentation where he was talking about the Agile mindset, and behind him he was just clicking through some like nice photos of landscapes and mountains, every once in a while. That was his slideshow. And I think the point he was making was very similar in that, the communication style was more in his passion around Agile and what he was explaining, and that the pictures he put behind him could be anything, but it didn't change the story he was telling.
Right. People could imagine how that related to what he was saying, and it fit in to the general. It's definitely but it wasn't
a skill to be able to present already. So I know initially, if you're new to leadership, that may be nerve-wracking by itself. But once you're comfortable with that, then it's time to hone in, right? Lock in on your stories, and maybe even as a way to challenge or combat those nerves. Knowing your story is authentic, and knowing that story fully
Right.
should support you in the situation.
Well, and the other thing about story, why it's so important when you're doing presentations, is stories are very conversational. And, I believe that the best presentations are a conversation with the audience. There could be performance elements to it, that's fine, but it's basically conversation. And so when you're telling a story, like, hey, I just came back from the store. You know who I ran into? It just comes out naturally. You don't have to write it. You just, the story. We have a format, which I'll share here. It's called BIPSO, which is background, problem, solution, outcome. So if you look at any story, that's pretty much it. So let's just say Cinderella, background. She's a stepdaughter of a really mean woman. The other two daughters or three daughters are all favored in the house. She's treated like a slave when she's an equal part. So that's the background. Problem. She wants to get out of there, but she has no dress. She has no shoes. She has nothing. She can't go to the ball to even get out of this horrible life. Problem. Solution. The knight comes in on shining armor and take the what do you call it? The Prince goddess comes down and gives her a nice dress and got to be home by midnight, but you'll get out there and you'll meet. Outcome, they lived happily ever after. And if you look at if you just break it down, if you say, I want to tell a story about software, let me give you a little background. The company I was working
same
for
format.
It's always going to be the same format. A little bit of background to set up the story. There is no story without problem. There's no character without problem. So problem's got to show up quick. I want to get a girlfriend. I want to go to the moon, whatever the story is. So it's got to show up quick. It shows up, like I say, early. And now you usually work on the solution, like finding the solution, implementing the solution, and then the outcome is the great result that you're able to achieve. And if you just mentally use that little format, even if I'm telling a new story, I want to start working on a new story. So I'll work on a lot of stories all the time and see how they flow. I'll think this is a great idea, and then maybe I want to add a joke or a line to it to make it a little more fun. And then I'll try it, and then I'll tune it up and really develop it. But I can go out right out of the gate, and just know I've got to give a background. You know what I mean? Like it's just, I could just stand on the stage and say, customer service is really a real problem. I went into a store the other day and nobody even came up to me. They didn't ask me what I wanted. I finally talked to somebody and they didn't even know what I was asking about. And I knew more about the products than they did. And it was embarrassing. And retail customers don't know why they're losing business or not doing well. Well, they've got to take some responsibility. The solution is a great customer service program that we can help you implement. You know what I'm saying? So now, but it's always going to be background, problem, solution, outcome. So if people want to kind of embrace that would be great. I shared that with
Don't give a presentation unless you've identified those aspects of.
Don't tell. Yeah, and just pop it in there. It's again. There's no story without problem. So you give the background to the problem, then you discuss the problem, then you go into the journey, the hero's journey to the solution, and then you go to the lived happily ever after, or whatever the case may be. So right. I hope this kind of illuminates, and I hope it inspires leaders to really work on their stories. And stories are, we're doing them one-on-one here, basically. That it's not just going up in front of the room and telling stories. It's in all communication. That's whether it's all communication. When there's something on the line, you want to put it in a story.
Indeed. Oh, thank you, Paul. Appreciate the wisdom as always. And thank you all for listening and watching. You can find a link to get a book for yourself down below in the show notes. And you can follow us along here on the journey. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Getting High on Leadership series. If you have any questions, you can comment below or send them in via email to paul@paulkarasik.com. Follow him on Instagram at PK_the conversation. Find out more at wholesalerinstitute.com and psychedelic-awakening.com. The Getting High on Leadership series is produced by Rob Sanchez and Apartment 113, which can be found at apartment113.com and followed on Instagram at APT_113.